Recorded last year, this episode of Drinking on the Edge is an unusual one that was done outside of the auspices of our Rhine Cliff studio. This found me in the dining room of none other than noted longtime wine author Hugh Johnson in his London home, in recognition of his revised and updated edition of his autobiography, The Life and Wines of Hugh Johnson, published by Académie du Vin Library. It is available worldwide, and Mr. Johnson's works are long recognized, talking about the history of wine, the geography of wine, the people of wine. And it's been my pleasure and privilege not only to have visited him this one time in London last year, but also to have encountered him throughout my 3 decades plus career in wine. Early days in Chicago, later on to encounter him in the halls of Vinexpo in Bordeaux. Later to have the pleasure of serving him when a sommelier at a San Francisco restaurant. And then during my time residing in London and serving on the executive committee of the Circle of Wine Readers, he was our president, and we would rub elbows at various events and discuss things and have the pleasure of each other's company.
You're making wine accessible beyond just an alcoholic beverage, tying in religion, history, the arts, culture, military encounters.
Have you seen my pop-up wine book?
I've seen it since.
You've done a pop-up. I've never seen your pop-up wine.
Oh, yes. I think people thought it was childish in this country. The Germans loved it. They called it Johnson's Weintheater. And it sold itself.
Sounds fabulous. There was a point when that American chap was making these beautiful pop-ups, which had a crossover appeal. They were children's stories, but anyway.
So that book is what kind of pulled me into wine as a potential life-changing thing. It opened my eyes up, it opened up all my senses to what possibilities were. Being the jack of all trades, master of none, it really fit, and I could put my arms around something that I enjoyed already, but now it made sense in the context of everything else in life. And that was the beginning of my career with wine. That was 1991. We first met 2 years later in 93, when I was biding my time at a Chicago office after leaving Whole Foods Market in its early days as a buyer, and you walked in one day on the time of the Midwest International Wine Exposition with its director, John Davis, who was a real figure in Chicago. You were there speaking at the Midwest International Wine Expo, which is a hybrid trade and consumer affair that happened every May for a long weekend in Chicago. Part of my career at that time as well, not at all related to having been inspired by you, was that I came originally from Chicago.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
of course. Hence Chicago being...
Yeah.
And I heard lots of stories.
Still there.
Yeah, I'm not kidding myself, of course.
But to the point is, you showed up during the time the Wine Expo was taking place, along with John Davis and Alexander de Salus and Christian Paul Roger.
Yeah.
And I can't recall if that time if Miguel Torres was also with you, but he wasn't.
I think that was the occasion when...
Oh, was Miguel there?
I don't remember.
I don't think so. All right.
One of these occasions, Paul de Salus, they said, you'll pour your Icam, won't you? Yes, he said, you'll bring it, won't you? And yes, that's okay. Anyway, he didn't pour it very generously. And at the end of the show, there was a sort of full wooden case of Icam, which he had to carry back to the play. Oh, heavily. I don't think he went to another show.
That's where good marketing people come and help you strategize better. So that was an amazing moment for me, Hugh, to be sitting again in this room after just a couple of years knocking around the business in England and back in the U.S., and to have you stroll in with these two French wine giants. Even I knew then at the age of 31 that this was something to be memorized. And then cut to 2 years later, I went to my first Vinexpo, 95. You were there promoting Royal Tokai wines. I was kicking myself figuratively. I missed your session. And as I left to go back to the big hall, for some reason, you and I encountered each other between these cabins. There's no one else around.
Oh, I see.
I blustered up to you, introduced myself. You probably don't remember, but 2 years ago, blah, 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 Chicago. And you said, oh, yes, I remember John Davis, of course.
Yeah.
And couldn't have been more friendly and willing. I didn't feel like I was really yanking you for your time. You really seemed to generously give me what amounted to, I think, about 30 minutes of your time, allowing me to interview you for a column I was writing for a Chicago Drinks magazine. There's more.
Thank you for these. It makes me feel rather good that I cast your first. No, that doesn't work. You're not swine. But
I've been called worse.
Yes, there must be another one. Thing about
what?
something on water. Is it that one? I don't know. You can't shove me to memory.
It'll return to you after.
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh, yes, and it will. Yes, I know what you mean. I'm not very good at aphorisms. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now that we've finished, my only concern was having them open, ready to roll, so we don't
Yeah.
have to take the time while we're recording.
But we can leave those white glasses for you.
I'll do the glasses that I'll use with Tokai.
Yes.
Up. Then,
Yeah.
if you go into the drawing room,
Yeah.
there's this cabinet
Yes.
with a mirror. If you open the door of that, in the upper part of it, you will find a couple of rather beautiful Bohemian crystal glasses with gilt over it.
Oh, fun.
So the wines we have today is the Pauillac de la Tour 2017, the Bride Valley Blanc de Blanc, or no, it is Blanc de Blanc 2018, and the Royal Tokai Nuilazo Lazo 2008, a single vineyard. And how many Petunos should we have here?
This is 6.
Oh my.
Single vineyard one is 6. That's how we make an obvious distinction. The number of people who can compare that with a message by inside is rather small. Right.
Let me get to
I
have.
think I'll open the bride,
Yeah.
and you'll see why my champagne corks were such a success. But actually, I didn't invent it. It was Alan, who was mad about wine, great collector, an oil man in Texas. And he was famous for finding ways of extracting oil from the ground in unlikely depths and going sideways and all that kind of thing. And I was talking to him, and I said, "Have you ever really used the champagne corkscrew?" And he said, "That's pretty interesting. I'll go and think about it." And he went back to his workshop in Houston and came back with this thing, looking rather like a sort of, a bit like a Henry Moore dog shot. He said, "Try that." And it is absolutely, he says, the logic is you've got the whole problem with the champagne cork is getting in it purchase of it.
Yeah.
People go like that. Once you've got it moving, it's free.
Yeah.
How do you twist it?
There you go.
So he said, that's how you twist it.
One more way that Texas has helped out the international wine business, besides what happened in Denson so many years ago. Yes. All right. A little bit of Houston for that. Hugh just uncorked the Bride Valley 2018 Blanc de Blanc. It's a great pleasure to be here on this early midday in 2023. It's 24th? It's March 24th today, and it is a Friday. And we're here talking about your recently updated book, The Life and Wines of Hugh Johnson. And we're here at your home in Kensington. And thank you for having me here, and thanks for being so generous to share these wines.
That's what we wine lovers do, David, isn't it? They're no good on your own.
I felt a bit embarrassed coming here empty-handed with that, but I realized that it's hard to transport wines as it is, and I'm sure you have your share of English wines.
Heavy stuff to cart about it.
Indeed, indeed.
Right. Okay.
So that there bit was for Hermione. Let's have some you and I. I remember early in my career going to a trade tasting, and the lady who was responsible for the importation of Ruinart in the U.S. watched this young pup swirling a glass of their, I believe it was 1991 Blanc de Blanc. Oh, no, excuse me. It was an 83 Blanc de Blanc. And I was swirling the glass, and I was a bit naive and inexperienced, not to know that the bubbles would drive the aromas up regardless. And she said, "Young man, you're removing what it took years of hard work of many Frenchmen to put together." And I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." Learned my lesson.
The old swizzle stick, that was an abortion. A ridiculous idea. But just, you're going to get foam anyway. You've got to wait for the foam. So give it a bit of welly. But that is the stopper. That's the done. Now this stuff. Stephen Spurrier was, later in his life, a master winemaker, which is not what he set out to be at all. He tasted every wine worth tasting, but when he looked at this Dorset Valley down near the sea, he thought it was then occupied by his wife Bella's sheep. She is a shepherdess, isn't it, Charlie? And he said, could you spare me a bit of that, because it faces south and the sea's just over there, and see what happens. And it's a lovely place. It's the most beautiful. Have you been there?
Yes, beautiful.
Beautiful valley.
Once myself. Yeah,
You have
Bella and Kate received me. Stephen was away on doing a speaking tour in Italy or something. I remember it fondly. And for those of our listeners who are unaware, he was referring to Stephen Spurrier, his colleague of many years, who I had the pleasure of knowing as well. And the wine that we're drinking now is his Bride Valley Estate Vineyard wines that he just remarked he had late in his career this desire to be making the product he was writing and presenting so studiously about for decades. And he did a pretty darn good job, I would say.
He's done a jolly good job. Much better than I did when I felt challenged to make mine. Yeah.
What was that? What happened?
We bought a farm right in the middle of France.
Okay.
This is La France profonde, very profonde indeed, miles from anywhere. And you saw the odd patch of vines because every farmer has the right to grow his own wine just for the table. And so it was always Gamay, and it was absolutely horrific. So I thought, I have the right, in self-respect, I must do it. And then I proposed to plant Riesling, because I love Riesling, and nobody in France except Alsace, they're not allowed to plant Riesling. I gather this is something to do with reparations to the First World War. They agreed that they wouldn't challenge Germany with Riesling except in Alsace.
So did you try planting Riesling at this Gamay patch you had?
I didn't, because the would have been after me. Yeah. You should see a French policeman say, "This is Riesling." And so I planted Gris from Bordeaux and a bit of Chardonnay. And we made rubbish wine, but boy, was it fun.
That must have been a great experience, giving you a little bit of sympathy, perhaps more sympathy for the people whose wines you were writing about so extensively already.
I've always been very sympathetic.
Oh, yes, you have.
In fact, there are some writers who like rubbishing wines to show how acute their palates are.
You've never been that way.
I've never done that.
Oh.
I don't think any wine, except my own.
I think that harkens back as well to something I mentioned to you in our email communications and a previous interview I did with you back in 2005, I believe it was, or 2015, excuse me, and where I mentioned that during all the falderall during Robert Parker in those days and the fighting the point scores and all that, you were very vehemently against the use of point scores, and you since softened your viewpoints a little bit. You see the value in terms of marketing, but you still hold fast, tell me if I'm wrong, to the idea that assigning a school grade score to a wine defeats the purpose in the bigger sense?
It obviously has huge marketing value, although you can very easily cheat. It's like the word award-winning. Award-winning is a word that's applied to absolutely anything. What award is that, by the way? It's so meaningless. Who says 90? Who says 95? I suppose I'm innumerate. I cannot apply a number to wine. I wouldn't know where to start. And I think, how does anyone know where to start, really?
Since we're on English Buzz, we talked about Stephen's previous work and the work that his wife Bella and daughter Kate continue here. You have seen the rise of English wines in general in terms of quality and amount throughout your career. I, too, again, always looking for the odd ones out. When I was residing here, I was one of the few people who was visiting the bubbly vintners and writing about them for U.S. and British publication. In the 2000s, there wasn't much going on except for a few. Of course, Mr. Roberts over at Ridgeview, and who did a hell of a job carrying the flag there. But there's been a recent real bump in the amount and quality of English wines, specifically sparkling wines, to the point where
I'd almost only sparkling wines, actually.
Do you think it's a good? Think it's a good
People
move?
remain to be convinced about English still wines. Although there are some very good wines, it's not in the mindset yet.
Okay, so what about bubblies? Do you think it's really taken hold here?
Oh, totally taken out. Oh, yeah, it's been accepted that we are very good. You know, enough people have said, this is not champagne, it's actually an alternative to champagne, and I prefer it to champagne. So it's very much taken hold. And reasons why? Everybody says it must be climate change. And it's true, we've gained 1 degree in over 20 years or something. One of the great determining factors is the length of time between budding and ripening, because a vine needs 100 days. And where the 100 days starts is crucial, because by the time it's over, it's either started to rain and it's autumn or it's not. So if it's still sunny 100 days after flowering, you're in business. And I think that is what is really happening.
The extended spring, such as we're having today, where tulips are blooming everywhere, magnolias, as Hermione mentioned as well. It's a bit, the weather keeps going in and out, but it seems to be a relatively warm March that's occurring.
Actually, wine grows dread in early spring.
Yeah.
Because the vines are going to be out when the late frost come.
Yeah.
So you actually want the latest budding you can.
Yeah.
And you want autumn to go on and on. There is no magic formula, except that our increase in the growth period in this country is the great boon to our wine growers. Now, I think we're on a good course now, but it's still, high acidity is, Jancis and I were just talking about this the other day, the value of acidity. We were having lunch and we were saying, now this really, why don't we think this, whatever dish it was, is particularly enjoyable? And she said, because it doesn't have any acidity. It's too bland. She said, everything in my mouth has got to have a little bite to it. And that's absolutely true. Why? It's got to be the right kind of acidity.
Especially in the context of food.
Yes, yeah. But English wine starts with this advantage, as champagne does. Global warming is doing something funny to champagne now. If champagne loses its acidity, it's lost a lot.
Do you think this might be, at least, if not the only reason, at least the important reason as to the increase of low and no dose champagnes and other sparkling wines coming up?
Is there a big increase? I don't know the figures.
I couldn't tell you in terms of bottles, but I can tell you in terms of labels, there's a lot more smaller experimental ones going on throughout Champagne.
But it's partly because people want alternatives. When the rosé, for some reason, they always charge more for pink champagne. It doesn't cost more to make, but it's an alternative. It shows that you're out there. As for low dose, my favourite, it's got this lovely name of Zodo.
That's why the marketing people get paid so well.
No, this wasn't far from me. This is Dermot Sugru.
Ah, sure.
Have you met Dermot? He's a broth of a boy.
My column on English Bubblies way back when for Sommelier magazine featured he and I standing in the vineyard together.
Yeah. I'm a great admirer of his. And
he was with Whiston at the time, I believe. Is it Whiston he was?
He's near Whiston, but he's no longer part of that.
All right.
He's out on his own.
Oh, I knew that, yeah.
He's married this lovely winemaker who teaches at Plumpton. And he's going to go from strength to strength. There's no doubt he makes among the best English bubbly now. The other person who makes wonderful bubblies, and very surprising, is Barbara Laithwaite. Laithwaite is our biggest one of our biggest wine merchants. And it's Tony and Barbara Laithwaite. And Tony has been into wine all his life, but Barbara came rather late to the party. And she decided to try on her own in the hills near Henley-on-Thames, in her garden, actually. She planted vines. And now they have a son. Henry has Harrow and Hope, which is a leading brand nearby. They rented land in Windsor Great Park from the Queen, now the King. So they make the Royal Bubbly. And it's brilliant. She and Dermot, to me, are the ones who've really gone out there and made something. It was there, but it didn't have the glamour. Maybe it wasn't even so good, but it was very, very good.
Things have come a long way. I had a conversation at Provine just this week with Simon Thorpe, who's responsible at Wine GB.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. But no, things are really headed up in quite a way. Just a quick nod to Champagne. Is there any, shall we say, one overly sparkling moment that you can recall with your many experiences with Champagne that kind of helped to illuminate you as to the complexity of its and the nuances of how great it is and can be? Please.
I suppose my most memorable was when we opened the 1911 Perrier-Jouet. Because some champagne collector suddenly gave up hope and dumped a lot of historic champagnes on the auction market. And I thought there was a complete case of Perrier-Jouet 1911, which people thought, that's no good, it's far too old. Anyway, it was the most sublime, possibly the greatest champagne I've ever tasted. Even better than the 21, so it was just incredible.
What do you recall what year this may have been that you tasted this 1911 PJ?
What do I recall?
Do you recall what year it was when you tasted this 1911?
Oh, approximately when?
Yeah.
Oh, it was about possibly 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So was that far along?
But when Michael Broadbent shared my appreciation for old bubbles, and he produced, hello, darling, come in. We've decided to come to David. Julie, this is David.
David, hi. Thank you for having me, on.
Well, what? You're filming. It makes the audio.
So, yes,
It can be edited. Please be edited. Not to worry.
you know, it's on camera.
It's all digital, but there's no filming used in the bit.
It just seemed much safer, but actually with the table it's the best place to be with a wine thing.
So, you have a drop? Yes, would you give Judy a drop?
You know what? What you doing here?
So those of you, for anybody
Well, that-
listening,
that-
that's
well,
Hugh's,
that-
Judy's,
but-
his wife Judy that just walked in. No, I'm just making sure it's logged in. So please continue.
It was,
So we're talking about the 1911.
the most expensive wine from Champagne, a couple of centuries, I think, was actually made of Pinot Green, known at the time as Fromenteau.
Okay.
And it came from this chateau near Reims. Michael was offered a few bottles to auction. So he said, we're going to taste this first. And unbelievable. And it was champagne. It was slightly fizzy. It had
It still had a fizz. It still had some fizz.
slightly fizzy. Yeah. But it just showed me what depths can come out of it. Anyway.
So who purchased the case? You or Michael? Did you have the friendship to share it?
I don't know.
Okay. That had to be asked. All right. So if I could use this opportunity to ask you the more personal questions. Before your sojourn into the greater world, what influence might your parents, Guy and Grace, have had upon what eventually became your professional pursuits? Dialing way back.
My parents really, not really.
They weren't wine drinkers?
Not self-conscious ones, didn't talk about it or anything. My mother, I don't remember her saying anything about the wine. My father, it was always there. And he was a member of the Wine Society, as all canny wine livers in this country are.
Okay.
And he used to buy, I just remember the one wine that made a regular appearance, apart from sherry. Of course, we all drank sherry in those days, and I still do. It was Chateau Les Ormes de Pez from Saint-Estèphe, which is still, it was then presumably going very cheap. Now it's in the upper ranks of the Cru Bourgeois. And so that was the first sort of name that I was exposed to and remember and still drink.
Were they amateur gardeners? Did they influence your gardening passions?
Oh, well, my father. No, we had a medium-sized garden down in Kent on the Down. And he, we always used to say, I've got a very interesting job for you, Hugh. You just, it was having a bonfire.
Which is fun for a child, of course. It's this exciting to have a bonfire, yeah.
No, gardening came later, really.
All right. So how and why is it that you came to wine eventually as the main of your life's work?
I'd started as a magazine writer.
Condé Nast, was it?
Yes, he was for Vogue. It's rather odd that they hired a man to join. It was all women business, and in fact, the talent was recruited via the Vogue talent contest, which you had to be a girl to enter. And you can imagine the winners were quite something. So I came into this features department with the three incredibly well-dressed, educated, beautiful young women. And there was me. So I think I thought, anything I can contribute, And I went to the editor and I said, I'd rather like to write an article about wine. She said, oh, we've got the Christmas issue coming up. What do you drink with turkey? You see, the corniest subject in the world. But it was the beginning. So this was in Christmas 19...
Well, I'm just curious, can you recall what it was that inspired you to suggest wine as a topic for your first article?
I'd got into wine at Cambridge University. There we are.
Thank you for that.
Now, I knew very little. I'd tasted some very good wines because we had very good tastings. But no, I didn't know what to drink with anything, so I did what any journo does. I rang round a few well-known people and just said, what are you drinking with your turkey? And some of them mentioned extremely expensive wine, so I just wrote it down and made an article of it with a joke or two, and that was my beginning.
Oh, it worked quite well. How have your research, and right, I'm jumping around here, how do you, and it's a more philosophical question to throw out, how has wine served you as you've served it, aside from the pure pleasure and of the obvious ones? Are there aspects of life that wine has helped illuminate to you or bring you to understand better?
As I said, I think in the first paragraph of my first book, there are very few subjects of the kind that interest me anyway, which it doesn't touch on. History I'm mad about, geography, ditto, the life sciences and culture. The differences between the products of Bordeaux, Burgundy and so on have far more, they're deeper reasons, and not just the soil types. It's the trading patterns of Europe, and the advance of civilization has brought wine with it. And it's very strongly commerce, because the best wine growing regions are linked either closely or pretty closely to centres of civilization, big cities, or centres of trade, harbours. Bordeaux is important because of shipping to Northern Europe. It's not that the soils of Bordeaux are uniquely wonderful. The culture has made the best of their unique qualities, but lots of unique soils around the world, and you could probably make good wine in most of them. It'd be slightly different, but a large part of the difference would come from the motives for making the wine. Was it for trade? Was it for luxury? And so on. It's all tied together in a way that fascinates me, and it's my writing.
In part, some of the things that came to me in reading your books in my early days of my career was the historical links between areas such as Aquitaine, Bordeaux, once being the property of the British Crown, and the links that continued to this day of why is that claret or Bordeaux wines are still so well entrenched and popular here in the UK. And I came to learn as well from your books the old trade routes between Burgundy and what is now Belgium help to ensure that Burgundy wines are disproportionately highly consumed in Belgium, not just because they're neighbors, but because of the historical links between the land-linked trading routes that were there.
These cultural links are deeper and wider than people realize. I've been to quite grand houses in Belgium, but they still buy wine by the barrel, and they're the only people who are allowed to. They've been buying for so long that they're not accepting the fact the chateau's got a bottle in. Oh no, we do our bottling.
So that's still going on.
I believe it. That's a few years ago, but I dare say it is.
Huh. And as I mentioned a little while ago, for the listener, viewer here, your work and passion extends beyond wine as a plant to the entirety of gardening and trees in particular. You wrote a very lovely tome on trees many years back, I recall. And for someone who is as ignorant as I about the other plants in the world, how does your work framing these other wines, how is your work framing wines as well as all these other plants? What points of overlap might be of interest to the wine consumer that they should acknowledge or perhaps even pay attention to? If you're the amateur gardener, is there something you can learn in your garden that would help you to understand wine?
Well, the careful culture of plants is what it is. And somebody wants a plant to do well, he takes good care of it. Mm-hmm. And there are aspects like pruning, that is part of plant maintenance and encouraging some parts of the plant to flourish at the expense of others. If you want a lot of fruit, you prune it this way, and so forth. It's it's the appreciation of differences. It's got a lot to do with, in common with gardening and wine. It's making much of subtle distinctions. It's absolutely in the mindset of serious wine lovers, obviously, but also of, think of roses. Why are there thousands of varieties of rose? Because that subtle difference is exciting. And give it a name and show it around, maybe make commerce out of it. But it's the fact that nature will produce these tiny differences which are unimportant until you focus on them. And then they can become very important.
So there's certainly an overlap, at least conceptually, between the two, though you might not be able to mark how that's going to affect the flavor of the resultant wine. At least noting these differences, these nuanced changes that can occur in the growing of a plant of any type, allows you to understand
And
them.
then you seize on them. Why do we take cuttings to reproduce a plant that's genetically identical? If you have seedlings, you don't know what you're going to get. You might be lucky, but if you want the same thing, you've got to propagate a cutting. This used to be the way that vineyards were propagated, not by cutting, just by burying a branch of the vine, which would root, and then it was part of the same plant, so the produce is going to be different. It's going to be the same.
Just pops in my head. What's your take on this, on the issue of GMO vines?
GMO?
Genetically modified
I
vines.
see.
It hasn't been a big subject of late, but it was for a few years.
I haven't knowingly tasted any.
Oh, it's just, we'll leave it aside.
No, I wouldn't be interested, frankly. Why should I be interested? Because science can do something doesn't mean it must, or that we have to appreciate it.
But so your veteran perspective on changes in the wine trade, given the amount of time and focus and knowledge you've enjoyed all these years, I'm really curious to understand how you view how the wine business has shifted as of late, both here in Britain and elsewhere. If you're willing to comment upon that or able to, where do you see the advantages or disadvantages that may have come with the rapid rise of technological applications? The betterment of viticulture and vinification techniques have been scientifically and practically applied. It's a big question, I understand, but you've seen a lot and you've done a lot, and even just a wide glimpse as to how you view what's occurred in your lifetime would be
I remember
marvelous.
many years ago thinking, what are the possibilities for wine just as a commodity without its distinctions, so that you, like the milkman goes around putting bottles of milk on your doorstep, couldn't that be wine?
In some places, perhaps.
The principal reason is taxation, probably. It's a milk cow for the government. Alcohol brings in the check.
Indeed.
We're getting close to commodity wine. And years ago, I was very good friends with Ernest Gallo in California, who got as close as you can, really, with hearty Burgundy and his Chablis Blanc, as he calls it, white wine. And he did a wonderful job. Absolutely amazing. Those wines were popular taste, but they were jolly good wines. And I remember once in, this story I haven't thought of for years. I was staying doing publicity for a book. They put me in the St. Regis Hotel in New York, just so that journalists had got somebody important to go and interview. The journalist came up and he said, aren't we going to, let's have a glass of wine. So I go to the hotel wine list. I think everyone likes Chablis, so choose a Chablis off the list. Up it comes. It had been stored in the boiler room, I think it was. Absolutely undrinkable.
Commonplace occurrence in those days, yep.
I think I had to send out and I got a bottle of the Gallo Chablis Blanc, and we compared them. And I had to convince this journalist, I was too noisy, sorry. I had to convince this journalist that the cheap wine was much better than the expensive wine. He got a terrible muddle.
Back in the day, the Gallo-Hardy Burgundy was actually punching above its weight, simply because for many years they were getting grapes from all kinds of vines before people cared about quality wines mostly, and a lot of those grapes that were going into the Hardy Burgundy back then were old vines that were planted by the Italian and Swiss immigrants way back when, and you had this amazingly rich mountain-grown Zinfandel and other grape varieties that now are finding their way to very prestige bottles that you can't get for less than $80 each.
Gallo and I are selling the same Sonoma wines under a varietal label and at a high price.
There you are. Who's thinking? Oh, the changing nature of wine communications. Going back to something you're clearly expert on. How do you see the changes that have been wrought lately with these electronic devices we all carry around with us, and also the communications now, the democratization, for lack of a better term, of people sharing their opinions, expert or not, with regards to wine?
It's fascinating because I'm not into blogs, I'm afraid, at all. I know there are hundreds out there, but who has time? Which was my justification for my pocket wine book. I thought, let's try and cover them as far as I can, the various questions and who's making what. And people said, but it's all out there. You've got a million opinions. I said, yes, but look, one opinion is better than a million opinions. It may be right or wrong, but it gives you a starting point. Otherwise, you're lost. So I produced my opinions for 45 years, and I got very few arguments. That was the thing. Very few. I think I got, in all that time, I got about 3 letters challenging what I said. Isn't that extraordinary?
I consider you fortunate.
And people say, why? I also find that it's terribly easy to add another name to the book. A book called Fatter and Fatter, which is no longer a pocketbook by the end at all. But it's very difficult to take something out. That's true of the whole wine business, I think.
We'd spoken, you touched upon briefly how climate change has impacted English vineyards. On a worldwide basis, how do you view the changes that you've already in place, that you've lived to see, and then what do you reckon is coming ahead?
Oh, Lord.
For at least for the wine producer and perhaps for the wine drinker who might want to be alert to what's going on that it might be different in their bottle?
This doesn't quite answer your question, but I wonder about the definition of wine, because we have all stuck very faithfully to the classic definition that is a fermented juice of fresh grapes. But why only grapes?
So why only grapes?
Additions to wine. Why shouldn't I have a blackberry scented white wine or whatever you like, ginger in my Burgundy?
So do you see that as acceptable or heresy? Or somewhere in between?
Matter of taste. Commerce is always looking for new wines. New is always the biggest selling thing. Even more, discount comes first, but then comes new. The new thing is flavored wines. I can't see anything against it.
Provided
purists will say, I like my Pauillac to be Pauillac. But no, I think it's an interesting idea.
I think a lot of people would be surprised at your comments about that. I think a lot of people would expect you to be a bit more stodgy in your taste, given your contributions for as long as you've contributed.
Salad doesn't interfere with the verity of what's in the bottle.
As long as there's integrity and honesty in terms of truth and labeling, so to speak.
Yes, exactly.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I've always told people, hey, if you want to cup some ice cubes in your white Zinfandel, that's fine with me.
Right ahead.
If you want a spritzer, that's okay too. You're paying for it. When I was working as a sommelier, that's fine.
I'm a great spritzer drinker.
Very popular these days and growing more. I've had some fantastic vermouth spritzers made in Maryland by a group called the Wine Collective lately. They make the vermouth themselves. They make the canned spritzers themselves delicious, and they have the character. What else? Oh, which geographic locations and technical developments pique your curiosity?
Sorry, what do they...
What parts of the world are coming up with wines that kind of are interesting you these days beyond it's obvious?
I'm behind the trend here, honestly.
Okay.
I'm interested to taste Chinese wines because it's a product of a culture that doesn't... Although the Chinese say they've always been drinking wine, it wasn't grapevine. There will be wonderful things out there, I've no doubt, but I find the field of the classical wines is rich enough to satisfy me for a very long time. Okay. I very rarely, this is an admission, I very rarely choose a New World wine in a restaurant or something like that, because I think they're very often overpriced. and I don't really know what I'm getting.
Fair enough. Again, it was some of the words that you wrote that inspired me to go to some pretty far-flung and lesser-known wine regions, wine-producing countries. The Caucasus, Armenia, Georgia, Turkey. 3 times I visited Lebanon when I was resident here. Other wine countries in the far parts of the globe, including China. I really hope you're able to taste some good Chinese wines. And there are some that are being imported here in the UK now.
Oh, yes. I'm not denying it at all. I am mildly interested, but there is so much nearer home. I don't feel a real need of it. Lunch yesterday with some wine friends. We had a New Zealand, a Hawke's Bay Chardonnay, very decent. And then we had a South African, very well-known South African Chardonnay. And I didn't even bother to finish the South African one. I thought, it's ripe, it's well made, but it doesn't say anything to me. I'm not tasting any wine in particular. I'm not getting any personality out of it at all. That sounds very crushing, but the greatest wines, as wild generalization, come from marginal places where it's just possible. And if it's easy, then you have to try to make it difficult to make good wine.
Speaking of some of the great wines, why don't we move along to the
Pauillac
wine from Chateau
a
Latour?
little work to do here. Now this bottle I can claim a little credit for this wine because for years in the 80s and 90s and so on, I was on the board of directors of Chateau Latour, the first growth in Pauillac. And we had the maître d'chai came along and he said, this is the Grand Vin that we've selected, these barrels, let's say 35 out of 100 barrels or something would be the Grand Vin. This is it. Then another 35 would be the second wine, which is called Les Forts de Latour. And that became very well known, incredibly good value.
Mm-hmm.
But after a few years, when I got a bit of confidence, I said, and the rest? And I said, we have friends, we sell it to friends. It goes on to the Negociant on the Place Bordeaux.
Yeah.
I said, it really tastes like Latour to me. And it comes, if not from the same vineyards, very close.
And it's made by the same experts who are making all the other wines.
Made exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Mandy, would you taste this? Yes, please. They said, there is a bit for local consumption. I said, well, what do you call it? We just call it Pauillac. It has the right to that name. But then they came up with this label, which doesn't say Latour, except to people who know the Latour.
It's subtle.
It's subtle. And then when you put it to your nose, you think, oh my God, that's the real thing. It really has a slightly diluted version of that very austere smell of iron and earth, which is Latour.
It's all there. Here's to your inspiration.
Yeah. It smells of rusting iron by the seaside.
I was recently in Bordeaux. I was in the town of Bourg, and just outside the halls there where we had lunch overlooking the Garonne. There indeed was sunken ships still there in the Garonne. They don't do anything to pull them out. Okay.
Extract of that goes into this.
There you are.
To people who are not in the know, that is a very fine wine. Huge character, beautiful drink. And if they're told that they can get that for 1/5 of the price or something like that, they say, keep my money.
I don't think there's much of this shipped out. I'm sure it's here in the UK. I don't know if much of this makes it to the US.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'll have to write them again.
Yep. So that is my choice as a sort of demonstration Bordeaux. This says all that the Medoc has to say, really, which is I want the best drink with food.
That's a great drink. And thank you. This is the first time I've tried this iteration from Latour. Thank you. What do you reckon? Bordeaux is going through a bit of a crisis, as is much of France in their wine. I was just there a week or so ago and met with vintners of various size, from the winemaker of Comtesse de Lalande to a young gentleman who's planting single varieties and making big, bold wines out of single varieties.
Mm-hmm. They're allowed to do that now.
Yep. And so there's a lot of struggle going on environmentally, both with the wildfires that ravaged it last year, the market pressures that they've been under for a long time, the fact that Vinexpo no longer happens in Bordeaux. Vinexpo no longer happens in Bordeaux. It's done with.
Really?
Yeah, it's Wine Paris these days. And and the owners Vinexposing have moved on.
Really?
Really, yeah.
I hadn't heard that. No.
No,
Where will it go?
it's moving on. They've shifted how it is that they're presenting themselves. Again, Paris in February last month was the annual main focal event. Now there are satellite events that happen in Bordeaux, but it's no longer that the same organization has, but it's no longer Vinexpo as we once knew it.
Yeah.
The biannual international
It was too
wine
big.
fair.
It was too big. It was too unwieldy, I think.
So in that,
The wildfires I read in the paper
Yep.
reached City Hall. Did you see that?
just yesterday, yes.
Somebody torched it. Well, and the king.
But that's political, not
has
environmental.
The king has postponed his visit.
Oh, as official now.
Yeah.
Okay, that must have happened a few hours ago. Okay. Yeah, that's the political issues and not the environmental issues. But looking towards what's happening in such an important fundamental area as Bordeaux, how do you see these difficulties impacting the places like Latour aside? The very top are doing just fine. But looking at Bordeaux overall, how do you see it? Of course, it being uniquely positioned here in the UK as a supplier, these different issues that it's facing. There's crises amongst the vintners and growers, in the small and medium-sized ones that have been well reported upon, and it's only getting worse. How would you reckon these vintners to survive, prosper, and for the consumer to understand the pressures perhaps that they're undergoing?
The whole wine world is polarizing between the collector's items and a whole lot of drinkable stuff or undrinkable stuff. I can't remember exactly what the years were when the pressure was on to plant in Bordeaux, and the vineyard acreage was at least doubled very rapidly. Vines were planted everywhere, a lot of them in white grapes, and you could see it as being a sort of normalization that this isn't working, that there's far too much wine.
So you think that kind of presaged the problems they're having now?
It must be part of the lead up, and also the huge improvement of the Midi and the Rhone in particular. But what challenged Bordeaux in the past for value and interest? Not an awful lot. Now it's got challenges all over the world. So good. Challenge is always good.
That's great. So speaking of challenges, what challenges do you foresee for the wine drinker, seller, maker in terms of understanding wine, getting wine here with...
Climate change is the headline one, obviously. There are diseases which the public never gets to hear about, but they're there. But in terms of climate change, I'm a great fan of Miguel Torres, who is a sort of leader on this subject, really. We've been friends for a very long time, and he's rather pessimistic, actually. But he's very activist, and he's moving his vineyards, the ones he can, higher uphill, basically, towards the Pyrenees. He's going for altitude, a little further north and a little higher up, and looking for the exact degree of ripeness that he wants and finding it. So there are practical things that can be done. Then you can take the opposite extreme. You can take growers in Victoria, in Australia, who are changing their location a great deal, trying out new places, going further south to be cooler. There's a great deal of scope. The best vines are in what have been historically the best places. But that doesn't mean to say that there can't be equally good wine made in other places.
What constitutes the best place is also shifting because of the impact of climate change. It used to be, for example, in Germany, the Erstelagen vineyards were easily identified historically. However, climate change has placed so much impact upon this northerly wine-growing region that it seems that the lesser vineyards in some vintages are providing the better wines.
In a sense, it depends what you mean by better. If you're looking for long-aging wines, many years ago, I had a tasting in the Rheingau. First thing I did was they trot out all the outlays of vintages and all that kind of thing. And then I said, what about some other vintages? So systematic, the next day, this very kind grower systematically said, all right, you want to taste all my bad vintages? Yeah. And the further back we got, the more drinkable the wines were, of course, because they were very high acid wines and they'd take a lot of coming round, if they ever do. Mm-hmm. But we found thrilling things back in the sort of dud vintages of the 1920s.
I discovered similar things when I was working at a Saar winery back in 2001. It had just been purchased and the old cellar was still there, and we can have our way with all the old vintages because they weren't going to be sold.
Yeah.
That was fun. That was a fun winter. So just this week when I was at Provine, Nahe vintner Martin Tesch, he shared with me that you once had told him that wine should taste different. And those 4 words, wine should taste different, the context we made clear momentarily, that those words spurred him to work harder on differentiating his methods of both growing and vinting his wines so as to allow his situation, his terroir, to maximally express itself. And that was many years ago, and that had helped to affect his entire career. And so that those 4 words from him have helped to create him to make quality wines in the Nahe consistently since then and get better and better.
Supposing you are making wine out of your vineyard for the first time, or a new vineyard, and you tasted it and you judged it by how closely does it approach to other wines.
Your neighbor's wines, perhaps.
Then you might think it's just, it's super, it's just like everyone else's. Or you might think it's not like everyone else's, but is that good or bad? Can I make something of it? If you take that positively, you could find something that only you had. And I think this is a process that is galloping in the new world. It really is. Why is everyone going north up the Sonoma coast or whatever it is? They're looking for these differences.
Good point. Yeah. And we're not, the New World in general is not bound by the same restrictions that Europe has placed upon its growers.
Mind you, I thank God for those restrictions in some ways. If the climat of Burgundy all tried to do the same thing, when there was some sort of generalized idea, what a shame, what we'd lose.
Indeed. So perhaps we should move on to the next wine. It will help to also help to reshape our conversation.
Did we enjoy the Pauillac?
I'm still enjoying it.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait and see how that opens up further.
I thought, because Tokaj is such an amazing special wine, it deserves amazing special glasses. Mm-hmm. And these are from a very famous Bohemian crystal maker called, oh Lord, the most famous manufacturer of cut crystal in Europe, whose name begins with B.
There's a lovely glasses, no matter who is it that made them.
The museum, which is in Carlsbad.
Yep. I like Calavivari. I was there just last year.
Really?
Yeah. My first visit.
The museum is incredible because
Not the museum, excuse me, the village itself, the town itself.
They have made glasses for every royal house, every aristocratic house. Mm-hmm. The museum is unbelievable. Coats of arms everywhere. Staggering glasses.
Just Bohemia crystal? Bohemia? Just Bohemia crystal?
What is the actual?
You said B, so I just...
It's Bohemian crystal, but it is... How can I forget? Anyway,
no worries.
Anyway, it is... I thought it was exquisite. Well, I could only afford 2 glasses. Terribly sorry, man. Find yourself a working glass.
You can share mine if you like. What brings me to this, too, is now, as amongst our meetings was in 2001, I was a sommelier at a San Francisco, California Bay Area restaurant, and you came to visit with your importer of Royal Tokaj wines, Mr. Daniels. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
You came by for a late lunch, and I happened to be there. Unfortunately, I was warned the day before that you'd be coming. Oh, great. It's been a couple of years since we met at Vinexpo that I'd seen you, and so I thought there'd be a lovely meeting. And I still have hard copy photographs from that day, and we drank some of your wines, your Royal Tokaj wines, which I already had on the list, so it was an easy account to come visit. Had a great time selling that both by the glass and by the bottle. But your association with the region comes from your having written about it before, I guess it was in 1991, that you came to be associated with the former government operation that was at transition to a private one. You tell the story, please. Much better than I.
I first went to Hungary and visited Tokaj in 1970. And when communism was not only bad, it was getting worse. People don't remember this history, but when the communists took over Eastern Europe, things went on pretty much as they were for years. They weren't good, but nor were they being buggered up by the communists. Then in the 70s, they got activist, and they started to really ruin things, not just politically as well, but For example, in Tokai, in the Tokai region, they pulled up all the old vines in order to be able to employ Soviet tractors that were designed for the Russian steppes. 3-meter wide tractors, so no old vines survived. They then planted whatever vines they planted and grew them up as high as this room on high wire.
High trellis, yeah.
It was everything that added, everything that made the quality was dismissed, and the wine that was produced went in tanker truck, literally in tanker trains to Moscow or Kiev to be bottled and trotted down. It was a sweet brown fluid.
Yeah. So it was a centralization of agriculture reform, and it made sense in the context of what they were living with at the time.
And one of the best, heroic top winemaker of Tokai today is Franceschi. Told me that he was in charge of production at the Boar Combinat,
Yep.
the cooperative, and that he was prodded to produce as much fluid as possible. That he managed to get up to 400 hectolitres a hectare,
Oh my.
which is over 10 times a respectable amount. And so it took a bit of recovering.
Yep.
But of course, each family, as I understand it, was allowed to keep, I think it was 1/3 of a hectare, something over an acre of wine, to make their own wine. Didn't have to go to the cooperative. And so they did. And so when I first went there for my second iteration, as it were, immediately after the revolution of 1989, when people probably forget, but communism collapsed in short order, and it was dawn for the people there. Not everybody saw it like that. They were so used to being spoon-fed by the Soviets and so on. They had a rather small spoon that a lot of older people resented it. They said, but what are you doing to our lives? Now we've got to work. Peter Vinding-Geers, who's a great friend and one of the most original winemakers in Europe, or anywhere really. He's made wine all over the world, always with interesting results and very often brilliant results. He and I both have an yen for history, and we decided to go, what was the one great vineyard acknowledged in the world that was stuck behind the Iron Curtain? It used to be the most expensive wine in the 18th and 19th century. It was obviously Tokai, so we said, go and have a look. And I said, I went there in 1970, and it's a fabulous place. And it has these incredible, I've seen these amazing miles of rock-cut tunnels and little barrels. And I tasted fabulous old wine. So I said, wow, that's up for grabs. And we went there, and conditions were not good. There was nowhere to stay. There was not much to eat. Literally, there was a place where we managed to get a bed, but where was the food? You had to eat. They'll have some, so you went there. And what was the food? It was chicken.
Or carp, if you're so kind. Is that
It was a different.
pull and get into the T-shirt River and pull something out? Yeah.
Yeah, were we discouraged? Not really, because we thought we can make a sort of growers cooperative. No, not a growers cooperative. We can go to the cooperators. We soon found out who the best farmers were. It wasn't difficult, because we had a meeting in the schoolhouse in Mad.
Okay,
Mad
Mad.
with a joke.
Church.
And we asked everybody to come, anyone interested to come to this meeting. And we hired 2 interpreters and put them on opposite sides of the stage, because we had no idea what they were saying, whether they were saying the same thing.
Oh my.
And the meeting was crowded. And we said, at the end of the meeting, said through the interpreters, we said, if anyone's interested in coming to an arrangement with us, to let us have your grapes and let us do the marketing and so on, let us do the quality control.
Did you have a
Bring us
did you have a winemaking facility already in place?
No, but we knew we could rent cellars.
Okay.
There were lots of spare cellars. And we were amazed. We went and sat in a cafe on the square, and these chaps came running round the corner with their pieces of paper. Count me in for this. So we got a lot of grapes. This was
1991?
1990.
1990, yeah.
But they brought their grapes. But nobody said anything about clean grapes or ripe grapes. And so we had these trailers coming in full of what's known in the business as MOG. And it was quite embarrassing when it was the head of the fire brigade or somebody coming in and he said, that won't do. Take the stones out of it.
You provided no instructions. This was your first time doing this sort of work yourself.
Yeah.
So you were operating under a disadvantage,
actually,
but everybody was.
It was being done.
Yeah.
We couldn't stay there for the vintage. It was being done by a young chap from Bordeaux
Okay.
called Samuel Tinon, who came from a family in Sainte-Croix-du-Mont, where they made a Sauternes
Pretty good
wine.
sweet wine, dude.
And so he was doing his national service.
Ah,
And he managed to swing it so he didn't have to join the army. He could do this national service job instead.
far preferable, I'm sure.
They tried to starve him out. He was not friendly.
I see.
Not friendly at all, but Samuel's a brave young man. He was
Okay.
about 19.
All is well that ends well. Did you actually have a 1990 vintage to show?
Yeah. Probably a bottle somewhere.
Yeah.
It's black by now. It ages to an extraordinary blackness. Anyways, so that's how we came out of it by degrees. We had no capital at all. Nobody wanted to invest. We did it absolutely hand to mouth. We made the wine in the open air, just a press, and it rained. But once it was down in the cellar, it was okay. And there were good bottles from that vintage. And then bit by bit, we managed to purloin or somehow rent or something, equipment. And then by the next vintage, we were nearer to being in business. And then people tasted the wine and they got quite encouraged and enthusiastic, but we could not find an investor. And for year after year, I used to take possibly people who I hoped would invest out to MAD at harvest time. People like Eric de Rothschild, for example, all sorts of possible people. And actually, Eric said, I think this wine is fabulous. I wish I had invested, but I just bought Chateau Riesec and I'm losing so much money.
That was a more sure bet for him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, you can't make money on sweet wine,
Yeah.
Which
Even back then he knew it. Okay.
which is pretty much true.
Still true.
Which is why we make dry wine.
Which we were supposed to have tasted today, but apparently you enjoyed them so
I'm
much.
drunk it all up.
They're all gone. So my apologies to your U.S. importer who provided me with a bottle and I was hoping it would be tasted here. I'll say something nice tasting it when I'm back in New York.
Yeah, but the dry ferment is what we get.
It's come a long way. Dry ferments have come a long way, and they're really, I won't say they're a trend, but they've developed a narrow band of enthusiasts amongst the wine cognoscenti, sommeliers and such in the bigger cities in the U.S. I know there's a ferment day that happens annually here in London as well. So there's some inroads being made to the, so we say, the better cash flow wine.
Yeah.
And it's certainly...
Appreciate that, but it was misunderstood in a way. I think we were the first ones to bottle it and offer it. But the point was that the ferment is not a fly-by-night grape. Oh, let's fresh, full of flavour. Yes, let's drink it. But if we keep it, something else happens. So you look for 5-year-old vintages, and it's a big, splendid wine.
I concur with you, and my perspective comes from having worked with the Slovenians for many years in the 2000s,
Yeah.
promoting the Slovenian wines here in Europe, and having tasted their version, which is referred to as Shipon, S-I-P-O-N. Their ferment, they like having dry, that's been aged quite well, and there's some amazing versions coming from across the border there in Slovenia too. Yeah. So ferment definitely has a reason to pay attention to it, both dry and sweet. So now we're tasting the single vineyard Nilaso 2008, is it?
2008. Yes,
Oh,
this
my.
one. Yeah.
Okay.
So you see the colour has gone to a most wonderful sort of deep amber. And the flavour has changed a great deal too. I haven't tasted this for ages.
Thank you for sharing it. My experience with Tokai wines dates to the days before I entered the wine business, when the communist era Tokai Asu wines were exported to the U.S.
Yeah.
You can buy them for a song.
Yeah.
And I knew very little about wines. I hadn't read your books by this point. And so all I knew is that these exotic sweet wine, and my sweet young palate liked it. And I can buy this same size bottle for something like an affordable $6-7 US.
Oh, yeah.
Back then. Oh, yeah. Mind you, the style of the younger wine, it'd be the same color for a wine that was made 3 years out.
Yes.
And a bit more oxidized, more flat, but it had a vibrancy that was easily recognizable.
Now, the export stuff
Yeah.
it was stayed at a level that was acceptable.
Yeah.
But of course, that was a tiny proportion of what they made.
But that's one of the wines that it kept me excited about wine as a concept before I even considered entering into my
Really?
career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the longest flavors of any wine, I think.
Great experience. Given that, we haven't talked about your work in the Atlas. We haven't talked about your work paired up with Jancis. You're paired up with Stuart Piggott on German wines, long wine. In fact, that was a big entry for me into German wines, the book that Stuart and you had written about. Got me into German wines in the early part of my career. But let's look in the historical context of your writings about wine. And for me, that's been the big pull. And by the way, I have to mention the television series you did a long way back that I enjoyed tremendously. And I wish that you'd continued it in some fashion.
That was the story of wine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was the most fun you could have standing up.
It came through. It came through on the TD screen.
Oh, yeah. I was terribly lucky because I met the Michael Gill, who is the producer and director, who he invented the BBC documentary series with the very famous series called Civilization.
Yes.
So we took the Civilization formula and applied it to wine,
Why not?
which I couldn't have done without a sponsor, because it was not, wine is not a popular television subject. So I looked around for a sponsor, and by some miracle, I was introduced to John Mariani. John and Harry Mariani were the biggest importers of wine into the US. They made a fortune.
Certainly of Italian wine.
Yeah. It was Riunite, they called it.
Yes, it was.
It was Lambrusco or close to Lambrusco.
Extremely popular.
Very popular. They made so much money, a slightly fizzy, sweet wine from the Bow Valley, that when I told him this idea and said I was looking for a lot of money, he said, how much? And I said, $1.5 million. He said, okay. And then we went, this was for public broadcasting. And then we realized that if you sponsor a PBS subject, you can't have a credit. Anyone else can have a credit, but the sponsor can't. So I said, but look, I'm talking about Robert Mondavi or this, that, the end. Anyway, I named all these winemakers. I said, they're all getting this publicity.
So how did Banffy get its name? And
The one that you can't mention at all
is the money people. Yeah.
as the money people, which was
Which no, by the way, it's no longer the case. That's the old rules. Times have changed.
at the end. We filmed the last film at Philip Banffy.
Yeah. There you go. Problem solved. If you had the opportunity to travel in time, which historical figure would you like to have mentored you in wine or any aspect of your authorship, or to have worked alongside? Which historical figure might have?
That's a fast ball.
I'm trying to move things from your life realized to your life perhaps imagined. What would it have been like to have made wine alongside?
Has somebody else bagged Shakespeare?
Go for it. He was a bit of a writer.
In my trade, I was lucky enough to be formed, as the French would say, in my trade by André Simon.
Great name.
And I was encouraged to meet him by the head of Condé Nast, the chap who started British Vogue, a man called Harry Oxall, who wrote a book about Burgundy, and he loved his wine. And when André Simon started the Wine and Fruit Society, now called the International Wine and Fruit Society, back in the 30s, as a reaction to austerity, he put on good meals at low prices, and it was a big success. But André was, by the time we met, I was sent to interview him. I think he was 83 and I was 23. But we hit it off.
That's a bit of a gap.
And André needed a bit of help, and Harry wanted to give it to him. So André then said, would I run the Wine and Food Society for him, age 23, while he went to Australia and New Zealand. I saw him off at Southampton in his liner.
Nice.
And in fact, my father was on the same line of coming back from South Africa. And obviously I learned a huge amount from André. nothing technical at all. I learned appreciation. So yes, he's the big influence.
All right.
And of course he could be poetic about wine. And he gave me his definition of a connoisseur, which is a forgotten word now. It was a connoisseur can tell good wine from bad and can appreciate the different qualities of different wines. That says it really. You don't have to be one-track minded. He used anthropomorphic descriptions. This wine was like an old lady or a beautiful young woman or whatever.
Phrasing which has fallen out
nobody
of,
dares do now.
phrasing has fallen out of fashion these days.
It's actually cancelled, which is pathetic.
There is that.
So what kind of figure does this wine remind you of?
Terrell, I'm just really happy to drink a 15-year-old wine that's holding up as beautifully as this is, visually and organoleptically, and just out of pure enjoyment. I'm loving this, and I'm happy that you opened it for us. I really am.
Oh, there certainly isn't a lawyer.
We can tell lots of lawyer jokes. Let's not go there. We spend all day telling lawyer jokes. I've lived with lawyers in the past, and I heard a few from them. So, other than the listener or viewer of this going out and buying your books, including the latest, The Life and Times of Hugh Johnson, what can either the veteran or the novice wine lover do to encourage his or her knowledge of and enjoyment of this beverage that both of us have made our careers around? What would someone who's just starting out, or someone who's maybe seen it all, done it all, or at least they think they have?
Experiment, try different wines, and share them. It's really all about sharing them. And
As we are here today.
exchanging views. Being prepared to talk about them is very important. I think most people take a sip, say, oh, that's quite nice, but then they never come back to it and say anything about it. Whatever they say, maybe it's very silly. But good wine of any quality at all is worth discussing, is worth talking about. You don't have to say brilliant things, but at least mention it, at least think about it. One sip is not enough. You've got to see what it does. I used to have my patent way of, when Parker introduced his...
Could you wait for 1 second? Because Nancy has to collect her coat.
Oh, right.
Probably there, Nancy.
Oh, that's done.
Yes.
Sorry,
Why didn't I bring that
Sorry
yet?
about that, very good.
Midday high. But Parker introduced his absurd system of scoring.
Mm-hmm.
I said, there's a far better way of showing your appreciation. How much do you want? So I produced my system. There was a one sniff wine.
Okay.
If you could bring yourself to sniff it twice, then you could get as far as one sip. Then there was a one sip wine. And then there was a 2-glass wine, a 2-bottle wine. That I thought was the real way of...
That's a great way to sum it up in a pithy way. Hugh, congratulations on this updated edition of your life's work, The Life and Wines of Hugh Johnson. And congratulations as well on the recent passing of your 84th birthday. It's up there on Wikipedia. We know what date you were born. And here's hoping that your good health and continued time upon earth allow you to write a 3rd edition of your Life and Wines. One never knows.
Jancis and I have got to start work soon on the 9th edition of the World Atlas of Wine.
There you go.
And I will admit that she will be doing the heavy lifting.
To each their own in their own time. Yes, Hugh, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, David.
Well done.
Ooh.